you know, when I'm with Asians who don't know anything about Jews, or even just people who don't know about Jews, and then you're the token Jew, everyone looks to you for all of the answers. And it's like, no Jew has all the answers, right?
My guest today is Amy Albertson, a Chinese-American Jewish activist from Sacramento, California, whose work focuses on tackling anti-Semitism through education, awareness, and an encouragement of Jewish pride. In addition to being an associate at the Tel Aviv Institute, an organization that aims to tackle and depoliticize anti-Semitism online, she is also a public speaker and writer and has been featured in the Jerusalem Post, the Algemeiner, and the Times of Israel. Amy, thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Although I guess excited is maybe not the right word, since we're talking about anti-Semitism, and we wouldn't need this podcast were there not anti-Semitism. But you know what I mean.
I know what you mean. I know you're not saying woohoo anti-Semitism. I'm psyched to be here. You're like, thank you. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I think if you were like that, you probably wouldn't be on the podcast. You'd be one of the people who we would be discussing.
Yes.
But look, I think you have a really sort of interesting, unique platform because you talk from the perspective of a Jewish Chinese American, and your dad is Jewish and your mum is Chinese, and you have said that in the area you grew up in, although it was quite mixed, you didn't really think about it. You didn't really think, oh, this is quite a unique thing. What was it like growing up for you in two quite distinct cultures in terms of observance, celebrations, and customs?
It's really interesting because, so as I've said before, I grew up in Sacramento, California, which is pretty diverse. And that's something I took for granted when I was younger. And I didn't notice it until I left Sacramento for college and went to Portland, Oregon, which is 95% white people. And so growing up, it was very just second nature. I grew up with a lot of mixed friends. Being in a mixed family was not that out of the ordinary for me. So a lot of my friends were celebrating in blended families with different cultures and different holidays. And I was also, my parents were very open to me going to my friends' houses to celebrate different cultures and different things. I remember when The Prince of Egypt came out, one of my friend's parents, they were like pretty heavy into church and they were Christian. And my friend's dad asked if he could take me and a few of our other friends with, together, we were kids, to see The Prince of Egypt. And my parents were like, sure, of course. And I remember going to watch this movie thinking, why did Christina's dad take us to see a Jewish movie? But it was like, these were the kinds of experiences. Like I went to church a lot, of different types of churches, just because it was like, if you're staying the night at someone's house and they go to church, you're going to go to church. And it was like a cultural experience for me. I learned about, Japanese culture from my Japanese friends, Chinese culture from my Chinese friends. And then in my own family, I think that I think it's a very American thing to have sort of blended cultures and to experience your culture in a more American way. So if you ask Chinese people about Chinese Americans, they'll tell you that we're not Chinese, and they'll call us things like ABC, American born Chinese, or banana, which is like yellow on the outside and white on the inside. My Chinese family I am actually third and fourth generation American, so we're quite American. And another thing is, in Asian American culture, it's long been a thing to assimilate, to be American. I remember I asked my grandma, why did you love grandpa? And she said, because he was so American, because she was first generation and he was already second generation. And she loved that he was so American. And she remembered visiting him at my great grandfather's restaurant, and everyone was speaking English, and she always talked about how he watched cowboy movies and sang cowboy songs. And so I think my upbringing was very American, um in this kind of assimilated way. But as I moved out of Sacramento and I was around less Asian people or less Jewish people, I started to learn there are certain things that I do or say or learned that were very Asian. And they're little things, the way I cook rice, the the certain phrases that my parents would say to me, things like this.
What's the way you cook rice? I gotta
Well,
ask.
I don't measure the water with a measuring cup. This is like a
Ah,
Chinese, I don't know, this is like a thing my mom taught me, that you like fill the water. People who are listening to this won't see my finger, but you fill the water, you lay the rice out in like a even layer, and then you stick your finger to the bottom, and you want the water to go to your first knuckle. And it works with every sized hand. And I swear to you, every time I've done it, it works better than measuring. I don't know. This is just what I was taught.
wow. I've read of this method. I still use the cup. I'm too scared not to. Well, look, I wanna ask now, what was it like for you when you first sort of had this realization that, oh, I sort of have this Jewish parts of me as well, or was that something that you were always very, very conscious of?
I always knew I was Jewish also, but I didn't really understand what that meant. So, different from having a lot of, there was like a heavy Asian population where I grew up. And so I didn't really know I had Jewish friends, or if I did, like there were Jewish kids around me maybe, but we wouldn't talk about that. It wasn't like something we identified as. And I knew I was Jewish, but I wasn't equipped with the information about who the Jewish people were or what it meant enough to express it further. So I knew that my family did Hanukkah and Passover in addition to Christmas and Easter. And also my Jewish, I wouldn't even call it a Jewish upbringing, but like the Jewish culture that I experienced growing up was like very culture heavy and not religious at all. Like I never went to synagogue. I didn't learn any Hebrew or prayers or anything like this. My grandma is, a self-proclaimed atheist Jewish woman. She lives in Berkeley. She's very Berkeley like that. And she, but being Jewish was important to her. And we did Jewish holidays on her terms. And so everything was very different. Even if I, had encountered other Jewish people, it was different. And I didn't really have anyone that I was learning so much from unless I asked questions. Um, which, because I saw my Jewishness as equal to my Chineseness, such a funny sounding. I don't think that's a real word, but um, it was just all part of me. I thought like this is normal. Everyone has these two cultures, and I'm just American, and I have two cultures. So I didn't really explore it too much, but I do remember loving Jewish holidays. Like Passover has long been my favorite holiday. Um, and I didn't really like notice these things until I think I left my insular kind of community of mixed people.
Hmm. Let's talk about Pesach, Passover, for a moment, because during Pesach this year, you attended an Asian Jewish seder where you used an Asian Jewish Haggadah, an Asian Jewish seder plate, and Asian inspired food. I think at one point in your Instagram video, I saw a chicken soup with matzo balls and tofu, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
What was that seder like? How was that for you?
It's so interesting because I thought when I first was going to this seder, which, by the way, the seder is put on by an organization called Lunar, which is a project of Bekola Shon, a great organization for you to check out. I actually was just invited to join the board for that organization. And so Lunar is a project. It's just a video project of Asian Jews sharing stories, but they started to put on activities, and we've kind of grown our community. So for me, at first, it was just like, okay, this is really great. Like, I'm not going to have to put on seder, and I'm going to go to be with my friends that I've been, starting to hang out with. But through the Haggadah, which was really well done, and just being with a group of Asian Jews, we had so many great discussions of our experiences, whether that's, some people are transracial adoptees. A lot of us are paternal Jews or coming from mixed families. And there's just so many experiences that we've shared that you don't realize that, at least I don't think I initially realized until I was in a space with tons of people that were having the same unique experience as I was, that I was having an experience that actually is shared with other people. And so, as there's we say Jews of color, which is just, an umbrella term. And I think within that, each kind of group has unique experiences. And as Asian Jews, we really do have our unique experience. And it's also something I'm learning that the diversity within the umbrella of Asian Jews, we have Indian Jews, Chinese Jews, Japanese Jews. We have Jews that are from Asian countries and they're Jewish. We have Asian American Jews. We all have very different experiences, but at the same time, we all have similar experiences, if that makes any sense. I feel like this is such a Jewish thing. And so it was really beautiful. And then obviously the food is delicious, because when you just fuse any kind of good food, well, that's not true. Sometimes foods shouldn't be fused, but the miso-based tofu matzo ball soup is really delicious. And shout out to Sarah Wong for making that.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Now, look, let's get on to the theme of the podcast, which is anti-Semitism, as you know, and being both an American Jew and a Chinese American, you have experienced two kinds of racism in your life: anti-Semitism and anti-Asian racism. What has this been like for you, and when did you first begin to take notice of discriminatory attitudes in this way?
I think I started to, well, the first time I ever experienced anti-Semitism was actually in middle school. And I didn't know it was anti-Semitism. I couldn't have called it anti-Semitism. A boy in my class was just laughing at me and saying, like, "You're Jewish, aren't you Jewish?" and just laughing about it. And I had no idea what was going on. I just knew that it hurt, and I knew that it was wrong, and I didn't like it. And I ended up slapping him in the face. Not that I'm saying choose violence, just saying that's what happened. And
yeah.
So that was the first time that I experienced a feeling of othering for being Jewish. And then in high school, I actually went to Catholic high school for academic purposes. And that's where people started to like tell me who Jewish people were and things like this. And I, again, was not educated enough or did not know enough about my own people to have the proper rebuttal to this. I just knew that it was wrong. And I didn't like being told who I was or who my people are by people that weren't us. But I think when I really started to experience anti-Semitism or be aware of what anti-Semitism was, as well as other types of racism, was when I left Sacramento, which was, a nice kind of little bubble. Not that it doesn't exist here. It's just that it's palpable. You can feel the difference. I went to Portland, Oregon for college. And as I said before, Portland, Oregon is 95% white people. So immediately upon just, from an optical point of view, I'm walking around and I'm not seeing as many Asian people visibly anymore. And then I'm on college campus, and Portland State University, where I went to college, definitely had an anti-Semitism problem. I'm glad to report that I've since visited and went to the Hillel, and things are a lot better than when I was on campus. But, my activism started on campus because of the anti-Semitism problem.
Mm.
And I think for me, that was when once I was in a place where I was different, that was when I started to notice these kinds of things.
So that's interesting because look, I'm British. I don't know loads about America, but my understanding of Portland is that it's meant to be quite a liberal, tolerant place. Is that right, or have I got that wrong?
So Portland likes to say that it's like a very liberal place, but to be honest, it's like one of those liberal places that, this is the way I always describe it, that it's like so left that it's gone around in a circle and slapped itself in the face. It's one of these places where, it's so progressive in its way that one time I read this study years ago. I think I was still living in Portland at the time. It was some study done. I wish I had known the actual facts of it, but it was done by some university, and they were trying to find the most racist city in America. And they chose Portland. And part of why they chose Portland was because not only have they gentrified the city so much, but they also like hate themselves because it's a city full of white people who preach, they preach about minority rights and all these things, but they've pushed the minorities out to the edges of the city, and they've gentrified the city so much. And then they have all this white guilt. So not only are they like treating their minorities terribly, but they have white guilt simultaneously. And so it's like they just feel shitty, I guess. I don't know. But for me, Portland was, it's definitely a place where I hate to call it this, but like a white sanctuary. Like you go there to be in a bubble of white people preaching for liberal values while you're not living them, because you don't have to, because there are no minorities around you. You can kind of like live your co-op, organic, vegan, liberal, progressive lifestyle because you don't have to face any of the other things. The city has since changed a lot since I've been there, as far as like, I know there's a huge homeless population problem, as there have been in a lot of places since the pandemic. There's drug problems, it's always had that, but it's the life of the city has greatly changed into a place where, people are starting to leave.
You said that it was really your time at university in Portland that sort of spurred on your activism in the anti-Semitism. Can you tell us a bit more about those experiences and what exactly made you think, oh, I've got to do something?
Sure. So it all started with a protested event. I was just getting into Hillel and Jewish Student Union, and once I joined Hillel and like started coming to events, I got involved very quickly. So we got a shaliach my second year at Portland State University, and he was the first person that brought Israel programming to our college campus. And he brought this movie, very apolitical movie. Some people from back in the day may know it. It's called Israel Inside, and it was done by Jerusalem U, which is now Open Door Media. It's very apolitical. It doesn't talk about the conflict at all. But anyway, so there's a student group on our campus called SUPER, Students United for Palestinian Equal Rights. And they came to the movie screening with their hands tied and their mouths taped. They sat down for about less than 10 minutes while someone filmed them, and they left. And they left us this note that said something to the effect of, I'm so happy for you, that your children are safe and thriving, and our children are dying and being murdered, and this whole thing. And this was before I had any idea about any conflict. I didn't know about Palestinians and Israelis. I didn't know about anything. I knew Israel was the Jewish country, and like, we're Jewish, so we like that. And there's countries that are Muslim, and there's countries that are Christian, and there's, you know, this one Jewish country. Okay, great. I had no idea people hated Israel. I had no idea its existence was contested. And I went to our shaliach and I said to him, what's going on? I need to learn all about this. Like, what's happening? And part of what happened was that the student leadership and also the Hillel leadership at the time didn't want to touch the conflict. And I was like, well, people are going to be putting words in our mouths. They're going to be saying that we're, you know, saying certain things or that we believe certain things, and we can't have that. I think there's definitely a place for us to speak up. And they're like, well, we're the Jewish group, not the Israel group. And for me, that was not enough. So I ended up starting an Israel group with another girl who happens to be Christian. And she actually lives in Israel now. She's married to an Israeli. And we started an Israel group that was a cultural group just to teach people on campus, like, what is Israel and who are Israelis? And yeah, I just saw, like, there's a place that we need to speak up. Like, who's going to speak up for the Jewish country if not the Jews? And it kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, you've also said, which I thought was quite interesting, in primarily Asian spaces, I'm often the token Jew. In primarily Jewish spaces, I'm almost always the token Asian. I thought that was quite interesting. What is this like for you, and how do you deal with that?
It's really interesting because I used to thrive on being the token. Like, I enjoyed being unique. I don't know if it's because, I don't know, I just enjoyed being unique and different. So I didn't mind it. And then eventually it kind of weighs on you because you become this like representative of, you know, when I'm with Asians who don't know anything about Jews, or even just people who don't know about Jews, and then you're the token Jew, everyone looks to you for all of the answers. And it's like, no Jew has all the answers, right? And I think a lot of minorities experience this, where you end up feeling like you're a representative of your entire people, which is very stressful and also just ridiculous. And then same thing goes with like being an Asian in Jewish spaces or just in other spaces where there aren't a lot of Asians. And that for me is particularly hard because, like I said, my Asian family is very American and we're very Asian American. So people will ask me questions about like China, or they want to tell me that they've gone to China. And I'm like, that's really great for you. I've never been to China. And my family is not, you know, we're very Chinese American. That's one thing that was so incredible about finding the Asian Jewish space, is this is something that we've all experienced, being token. And especially being like a Jewish Asian or an Asian Jew, it's just, it's not common. It's not that common. And you know what it feels like to be in these spaces where people expect you to represent people. And then also there's the whole thing of stereotypes. So it's like, you're Asian and you're Jewish. Do you fit? I feel like people are just wondering and curious, like, how do you fit the different stereotypes, or do you fit the stereotypes? And it's like, well, I'm just a human. So maybe I do and maybe I don't, but like, does it matter?
Mm. I think that's, stereotype is a really interesting thing, and many listeners of the podcast will by now be so familiar with anti-Semitic stereotypes and tropes and dog whistles, but they may not be that familiar with anti-Asian ones. Would you please enlighten us and let us know what are some anti-Asian tropes that we should be looking out for?
Sure. So the thing about anti-Semitism, which many people, like you said, on the listening to the podcast probably know a lot, is like there's a lot of punching up when it comes to anti-Semitism. And actually, with anti-Asian racism, there is also the stereotype that we are, you know, the model minority. There's the model minority myth, which I think really affects both Jews and Asians because we are successful minorities in America. This is all pertaining to mostly America. I can't speak for other countries. Um, and so there are these stereotypes of, Asians are doctors or lawyers, or they're really rich, they're good at math, these kinds of things. But then there's also other Asian stereotypes. For women, it's hypersexualization, exotic women. There's the culture of us being subservient, that we're timid, that we don't speak our minds. And this is also, it's really interesting because where Asian women are hypersexualized, Asian men are more like infantilized as not masculine, not sexy, not attractive. And that's why things like Crazy Rich Asians or Shang-Chi and movies where we're seeing Asian male leads is a big deal for us as an Asian community, because we've never seen like Asian male sex symbols. So those are some of the tropes. It's very interesting, the crossover with anti-Semitism, where it is that whole kind of like, it seems on one hand that it could be positive, where someone's saying like, you're so successful, but really it becomes a negative. I don't know if you've heard about Harvard and other schools where they started to cap the number of Asian students or stop in,
No.
because I don't know. Yeah. So I don't want to speak too much of the details because I really should do more research about it, but you can look it up. And I believe there have been lawsuits where Asian students have been rejected from Ivy League schools, and the schools are like, well, we don't need more Asians, and like, you all don't need, like, where affirmative action basically applies to all other races but not Asians. And that's problematic in itself because it's discriminatory in general, but also that's a stereotype. Not all Asians are wealthy, successful, highly educated. There are plenty of Asian populations in the United States that are, living in poverty, immigrant families who do not have these things. And sure, maybe they're more highly educated, maybe the culture pushes education, but it doesn't mean that affirmative action shouldn't apply to us.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And I also thought you touched on some really interesting points about the overlapping of anti-Semitism and anti-Asian racism, particularly talking about the model minority, successful, rich, comfortable, these things. And at the end of the day, that is a stereotype that just does not apply to so many people. And it's also so ridiculous when you see high profile names accuse Jews of being white. When people state that Jews are white, like people like Whoopi Goldberg, who said that the Holocaust was, quote, white people fighting each other. This leads down a very dangerous path of falsely asserting that Jews have white privilege and therefore cannot be victims of racism. And look, this argument is wrong and damaging for several reasons, not least because it eradicates the existence of Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews, Asian Jews, Black Jews, to name a few. But also, the more the ideas of whiteness and power become synonymous, a lot of Jews look at their history of persecution and the number and proportion of hate crimes targeting Jews today in the Islamic world, Europe, the UK, North America, and they don't see how they can be classed as white. When you see this argument that basically Jews are white, as a Asian American Jew yourself, what do you make of this?
So this is like a very sticky and complicated conversation. As a Jew who is not with pale skin, and look, it's not because I don't know about this experience, right? My dad is the dictionary picture of a Ashkenazi Jewish American man. So when it comes to Jews and whiteness in America, again, I'm speaking about in America because I think this racial identity politics, racial classification, the need to classify people as a certain race definitely is an American fixation. So that's a first problem. It's like, why are we fixated on this? But another thing is, so I would say that there are Jews who, from an optical point of view, have white skin or pale skin, that they can walk through the world with an assumption that they might be a white person. Now, when we look deeper into the definition of what makes someone a white person, or what makes, what is the white race, of course, Jews do not fit this at all. And I think there's a lack of education or knowledge of who the Jewish people are as to why they put them in that category. So people aren't aware of anti-Semitism. People see a visibly white person and don't understand that they've actually come from, generations of persecution. They think, oh, well, your ancestors immigrated to America from a European country, which makes you part of European colonization. But they don't understand that, no, our families came here as refugees, escaping anti-Semitism, escaping being told we are not part of the white race. They don't understand that white supremacy, because in America, it's binary, right? White versus black, and it's visual. People need to see it. So they don't understand that white supremacy doesn't mean white people who hate black people only. It's white people who hate all of these different people, and Jews are one of these people. And we're a very small group. And I think it's complicated because there are, as I said before, there are white functioning Jews. I don't like to say passing, because passing is so, to me, that's like painful. And also, it's not, I wouldn't call it privilege, because it's not a privilege to have to hide who you are, right? So on my side of the coin, I experience as an Asian, I appear as Asian. No one would know I was Jewish unless I told them, but it's not a privilege to be constantly assumed you're not who you are, to have to explain who you are, and it's painful to hide who you are. So I can sympathize with people who, like myself, cannot hide certain parts of who we are. And then there are Jewish people who cannot hide who they are and should not have to hide who they are. So I think, when we have this conversation about Jews who are white and can they pass as white, and like some Jews can pass as white, but I think it's a twofold thing to understand the experience of people who they do have that pain of like what it's like to diminish parts of you. And then we have to remember the pain of people who cannot diminish parts of them and will experience discrimination because of those parts of them.
Mm, mm. Now, during the heights of the COVID-19 pandemic, the world saw a dramatic increase in anti-Asian racism. Because the first cases of the virus were reported out of Wuhan, China, racists took this opportunity to abuse Asian people across the world, subjecting them to verbal assaults and violent physical attacks and spreading dangerous rhetoric online. And you have stated that during this time, you were on the receiving end of this kind of hatred. Can you tell us what this was like for you?
I can. So, sorry to break it to people, but I actually was living in Israel during this time, at the beginning of the pandemic. And so what I experienced happened in Israel. And I remember I was at a bus stop and I heard behind me two people. They were American, to be fair. Two people discussing, a husband and a wife, discussing how they should shut all of the Asian people out and they're bringing this disease and this whole thing. And I turned around and I looked at them, and this man looked me in the eye and said to his wife, "We should kick all the Asian people out of this country." And I was shocked that he had the audacity to do that. The joke was on him because we ended up needing to get on a bus came and he was like hurrying his wife to get on that bus, but I actually was getting on that bus. And then he was like, no, 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 we'll take the next one. We'll take the next one. And he was like so flustered because he knew that I had like saw him and didn't want to be trapped on a bus with me. But I was just like, what? Like, I cannot believe you're actually saying this. And there were different reports on social media of Asian people in Israel reporting that they, had been attacked, and people were so dumb. They're attacking, like, there was an Indian rabbinical student who was attacked physically in Israel for being Asian and bringing the disease. And I had coworkers making jokes to me about getting COVID, or like I coughed and they're like, "Oh, Amy, you can't do that." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And they're like, because you're Asian. And I was just like, that's not funny. Like, that's not funny. Um, and then it became really like, I felt the paranoia or the stress that I think people feel when they're, I guess this is something that a lot of Jews feel with anti-Semitism being so rampant, especially very visible Jews. Like Hasidic Jews have been getting beaten up in New York and things like this, that you walk around just like constantly looking around. When anyone's staring at you, you wonder why they're staring at you. And that's kind of how I felt. I would get on the bus and be like, no one wants to stand next to me. People are afraid of me. Like, don't sneeze, don't cough. Um, it was stressful.
Yeah, that amount of vigilance must be so exhausting.
It is really exhausting. And then I definitely had much more of a sympathy for people because, like I said, growing up, I didn't really have to worry about Asian racism. I had a few experiences with anti-Semitism, um, but I didn't really have to feel that. And in college, I definitely felt it more as far as like being a minority in a place full of white people. But I think I was so at the time focused on my activism within the Jewish community, and I was really thriving and involved in in college life, that I didn't experience it the same way, and the tension became much more palpable during COVID.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I learned a lot from your platform. I think it's a really good educational resource. You post a lot of different things there, and something that you posted on there, which I thought was really interesting. You often use your platform to educate about Jewish communities in China, namely Kaifeng and Harbin. You also highlighted how 20,000 Jews escaped to Shanghai during the Holocaust. I didn't know a lot of this. Why do you think that it's so important to highlight these moments from history that people may not know about?
I think it's really important to educate people about the global picture of the Jewish people. I think one of our biggest disservices to ourselves and the public is that we don't know about all of these. Like, I didn't know either, and I'm learning. And so, one, it was helpful in my identity building and as an Asian Jewish person to learn about the diversity of Asian Jews and the history. And, yes, I'm an American born Jew and I come from Ashkenazi roots. My great grandparents are from, present day Ukraine and Poland and this kind of stuff. But there are Asian Jews who are born Asian, that are born in Asia. There are communities there. There's Jewish history in Asia that we just don't know about. And I think it's really important because there is Jewish history in so many places. That's the nature of the diaspora. We are literally all over the world, and we have found ways to survive and build community and maintain our peoplehood in all of these places. And I think it's important for us to learn as many stories as possible.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I want to ask you something, and tell me if this is too contentious.
Sure.
You have previously said that the Jewish American community should be wary about the way in which it claims Chinese culture. You said, I understand lots of Jews in America love Chinese takeout, but Chinese food is not Jewish, it is Chinese. I thought this was also very interesting. Can you tell us a bit more about this? And as a Chinese American Jew, what are you thinking when you see this?
it's just kind of an annoying thing. It's, you know, I guess the term is cultural appropriation, but it's just like every culture has enough to claim for itself, to celebrate for itself. Like, why do you need to take things from other cultures? And I love the relationship between the Chinese American and the Jewish American community. And that's great. And, you know, I love that we have these traditions of Jews eating Chinese food on Christmas. But when people say things like Chinese food is just as Jewish as it is Chinese, it's like, it's just not true. Also, a lot of the things that that Jewish people are eating at the Chinese restaurant is not the stuff that the Chinese people are eating. Um, you know, to make Chinese food kosher in and of itself is already straying from Chinese authentic culture, because things like pork and seafood are heavy ingredients. Yes, we don't mix meat and milk most of the time. Like, there's not a lot of dairy in Chinese food, but you know, it's just things like this where it's like you're eating an adaptation of what it is. Another thing that really bothers me, and I think this might even bother me more, is I saw a couple articles about mahjong. And mahjong is a Chinese game that has permeated into a lot of older Jewish people, or Jewish women mostly, also play mahjong as a social thing. They'll have like their mahjong group. It's kind of like bridge for, I guess, I know that like non-Jewish older women play bridge a lot. I don't know. I've never played bridge. But mahjong is a Chinese game, right? And there's been several different people that have kind of claimed this as their own. There was a group of women who were not Jewish, to be fair, who created a redesign of mahjong where they basically took out the Chinese and made it more accessible to white women. And they said their whole marketing ploy was like, finally a mahjong set that I can identify with. And it's like, yeah, you can't identify with it. you de-Chinesified mahjong for yourself. Like, what do you think you're doing? Like, that's because this game is Chinese, and like, you enjoy it, and that's fine, and I love that you enjoy it, but like, come to terms with the fact that you just play a Chinese game and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, you don't need to take out the Chinese from it so that you feel more comfortable to play the game. Learn a few symbols, lady. I don't know. So it's things like this that just kind of are frustrating, because, and I think it's just because, as I said in the beginning, we have enough of our own culture to celebrate, and it's nice that we, you know, are doing things from other cultures. It's just kind of that whole concept of, I don't know why I can't think of the right word right now, but it's like not admitting, but just accepting that we are enjoying something of someone else's. There's nothing wrong with enjoying something of someone else's, but don't take it as your own. Don't say it's yours when it's
Yeah,
not.
I think that's more than fair, to be honest. Now, look, I want to ask you, as we sort of draw to a close, what do you want more people, Jewish and non-Jewish, Asian and non-Asian, to know about Asian Jews?
I think it's important for people to realize that Asian Jews, as much as we're different, we're also just like you. You know, we're part of the community. We do and can do just as much as anyone else. Also, I think in the American Jewish community, it's important to remember, like, we're all Americans. And I don't mean this in like an affiliation or an allegiance to America kind of thing. I mean, like, culturally, we're all, you know, we come from different places and different cultures. And that's one of, you know, the beautiful things about American culture. And we all come together and we converge in these different ways. And this is, you know, it's nearly 2023 now. Humans, and Americans especially, are very diverse. There's a lot of mixing in the world, and so it's not so weird, or like it shouldn't be a weird concept for people that people like me exist. And I think another thing to remember about Asian Jews is that we exist in a lot of different ways, right? And and all of those ways are valid, whether you're adopted, which not all of us are, but if you are, there's nothing wrong with that, or whether you come from a mixed marriage, no matter which parent of yours is Jewish, that you shouldn't be belittled, or your Jewishness shouldn't be questioned. Whether you converted, whether you're an Asian Jew from an Asian community in Asia, all of these different things, we exist in all of these different forms, and all of them make us just as much as a Jewish person as anyone else.
Mm. Mm. For sure. Now, I'm going to ask you a question that I ask all of our guests.
Sure.
If someone who is not Jewish says to you that they want to help in the fight against anti-Semitism, where should they start?
They should start by learning anti-Semitic tropes, understanding how anti-Semitism is different from other forms of racism, because that's the first way you're going to be able to call it out. So learning is the first step, I think. And then once you're able to identify anti-Semitism, when you hear something or you see something, say something. It's so simple. I know we say like, see something, say something, but like really, yeah, the reason people preach that is because it's really that simple. Because the more you let someone else know, the more likely more people are going to learn. And I think, you don't need to feel guilty for not knowing. No one is born knowing what anti-Semitism is, except maybe Jewish people are basically born knowing because we're told from such a young age. But yeah, just learn a little bit about it, and then be brave. That's really what I can say.
All right. Amy, please tell the listeners, what have you got going on and where can people find you?
Sure. So the best place to find me and to keep up with me is on Instagram and Twitter if you're into that. And I am the Amy Albertson. That's the Amy, AMYALBERTSON, on both platforms. And yeah, feel free to slide into the DMs. I'm always happy to talk to people. Yeah, that's where you can find me.
All right. Amy Albertson, thank you so much for coming on Podcast Against Anti-Semitism.
Thank you for having me.